This new Hunter Void build is insane. You'll be running around in endgame PvE just melting everything with insane DPS buffs stacked up from multiple sources, while always having invisibility available. Now Gyrfalcons hasn't been around much this past month since it's been enabled and disabled multiple times, but with this build setup today, you'll be stacking multiple damage buffs and debuffs to cause some serious damage inside of endgame PvE content. And there are quite a few different ways you can use this build, which I will go over later on in the setup. So guys, if you like this one, be sure to leave a rating, comment, subscribe and share for more, and now let's begin causing chaos with our Void Hunter build. Roll the intro. Now firstly, before we start, I will just quickly mention that if you like this build and you want to see more like this, then you can follow along this series, as I do have a full playlist of new and updated builds down below, and I will be adding to that playlist each week until the end of the season, where we will then start the next one. But with this build today, you will be able to run around in endgame PvE just destroying everything, because you'll not only have infinite invisibility for whenever you need it, but you'll also get overshields, DPS buffs, faster supers, and overall you're just going to be unstoppable. Now the build does work better with certain weapons and mods, but I will point out all the alternatives you can use with the build so that you're not restricted to using things that you might not have. And if you guys want to skip the setup, then you can, because there will also be a dim link down below too. So before we get into it, I do also want to point out that we won't be using the Collective Obligation Exotic Pulse Rifle, which by the way I haven't actually got myself yet since I don't really raid much, but I know that using this you can achieve a stupid DPS output when combined with certain things in the build, but I feel this is not only massively restricting your loadout options, but it also means that you have to use certain things in order to make it effective. But if you do want to use Collective Obligation, then the other things you'll want to use in the build are the Stylish Executioner, the aspect in the subclass, and then the Suppressor Grenade. Otherwise you're going to have issues with maintaining the chain between being perma invis and having that constant damage buff from the exotic armor. It is an option you can use, but personally I wouldn't use it. But if you do and you can maintain the chain of suppressing and weakening enemies, and then going invisible and repeating, then you'll not only get the 35% damage buff from the exotic armor, but you'll have a constant 20% debuff on top, which is crazy. Now the way we'll use this build with what I believe is the best setup that you can freely change to use multiple things is first run in and go invisible with your melee charge. Then you'll come out of invis with a DPS buff and start killing adds. Then you'll make sure you have one add that is finishable, and then you'll dodge near them to go invisible while instantly getting your melee invis back, and then finish that add while invisible. This will give you a reserve overshield, a 375% increase to your class ability recharge rate, almost instantly giving it you straight back, and then the damage buff. From here you'll get a weapon kill which will then spawn a void elemental well. Picking up the well, being invisible, and then coming out of invis will give you a 35% damage buff for 6 seconds, a 25% damage buff to void weapons for 10 seconds, ability energy, and faster super regeneration. Then from here you'll just go around melting everything instantly with your void weapons. To top this off, when it comes to boss DPS, you'll shoot your Tether at them, debuffing them by 30%, go invis and pick up a void well to give you the 25% and 35% stackable damage buffs, and then you'll use your heavy weapon to melt them down to the ground. It seems like a lot of work, but realistically all you're doing is using your dodge to go invisible and create void wells, to then cause damage afterwards and then repeat. Finishing adds while invisible is only required if you have a really low base cooldown for your mobility stat, but either way you're going to be going invis quite often while always having that extra DPS output and making targets volatile. You can use Collective Obligation or even a Heart Shadow, but I really don't feel it's needed. So going over the setup of this build and starting with the subclass here, we will be running the Hunter Void NIGHTSTALKER subclass with the Shadow Shot Mobius Quiver. This is a really good super ability, especially for damaging bosses, but the next thing you want to run is a Gambler's Dodge, so that we can instantly recharge our melee when dodging near enemies. Then you can run any grenade of your choice, that doesn't really matter, but the aspects are going to be Trapper's Ambush, activate Quickfall to spend your melee charge and dive to the ground, creating a large smoke cloud on impact. Targets in the cloud are weakened and allies are made invisible. You can also throw down a charge as well, really good aspect to use, but the second one we have here is Vanishing Step. Dodging makes you invisible, and then you will get 2 fragment slots with this. If you are using Collective Obligation, then you will want to run the Stylish Executioner aspect, otherwise you are going to run into a few issues, but that's only if you want to constantly be shooting debuffed enemies to go invisible, and then coming out of the invis to get the damage buff, just to go back invis and repeat. It's quite a good setup to use in my opinion, but it just means that you have to always have that exotic pulse rifle on and nothing else, and then you'll have to maintain that chain by having suppressed or weakened targets to begin with. Now the fragments we have are Echo of Leeching, only really using this for the plus 10 to my resilience stat, ideal for those triple or quad 100 stat builds. Echo of Dilation, again only using this for the extra stats. and then Echo of Persistence, so that our void buffs such as invisibility and overshields will have an increased duration. Now if you don't need the extra stats or you don't care, then you can use Echo of Reprisal for the extra super energy, or an Echo of Starvation with a Siphon mod for that Devour, but it's really down to personal preference. Moving to the loadout, I'm using Arbalist, which will cover anti-barrier champions, really good exotic for all PvE content. Then you want either an Overload bow for this season, an Unstoppable Pulse, or an anti-barrier scout rifle. You ideally want these weapons to be void, but again that's only going to matter if you're running a Font of Might, otherwise you can use what you want. Heavy weapons we have are this void sword, really good choice, or the craftable void linear fusion rifle this season. If you are going to go with a sword, then that'll work nicely because you can go up to targets while invisible, and then coming out of the invis you'll have the 35% damage buff for 6 seconds, which is most likely more than enough time to kill a master champion while underpowered. Now other exotic choices to use for the weapons are firstly a bad juju. This is if you want faster supers. Arbalist, great for your anti-barrier champions. A Limon bow, also good for your overload champs. And it is a void bow too, so that's a bonus. You also have Lorentz Driver, and then the Heart Shadow, which is great for extra invis. If you really want to have a laugh, then you can use a Rat King, but please don't do a GM with me if you are going to use that. I would stick to using that in easier content. Now as for the exotic armor, we are going to be using the recently re-enabled Gyrfalcon Hauberk. This reads, your weapons gain a bonus to damage briefly after you emerge from being invisible. When you are invisible and defeat a combatant using a finisher, you and your nearby allies gain a reserve overshield and improved class ability regen. These reserve overshields can be deployed by using a class ability, and I have to say that the overshields can save you quite a lot. I've had times where I'm nearly dead even when going invisible because the bullets still track to you, but the overshield saved me. So it is a great exotic to use, but if you don't want to use this or haven't got it, then your alternatives to use are firstly Omnioculus. Use this for team play in things like a Grandmaster Nightfall. The Sixth Coyote, great for solo play when doing solo flawless dungeons and stuff. Graviton Forfeit, also good. Assassin's Cowl if you really want to go with the invis build, and then also a Frostees, great for low stat builds. As for the main mods, first up we have Reaping Wellmaker. This will spawn in a void well when getting a kill with a weapon after using our class ability. Then picking up that well we'll use Font of Might so that we'll have increased weapon damage to void weapons, which is a 25%, and this does stack with buffs and debuffs, which is why I've included it into the build. If you don't want to run void weapons and, well, Font of Might, then you can throw on other well mods like Well of Utility or any mod that is going to help you get your dodge pack quicker. Otherwise the next mod is going to be Font of Wisdom so that we can get an increase to our supers recharge rate when also picking up that well. The other two mods are going to be Radiant Light for the plus 20 to strength, and then a Powerful Friends for the plus 20 to mobility. You want to run these when going for a triple or quad 100 stat build, but we are only using those mods for the secondary perks, which is the stat increase. Now for the normal mods, starting with the helmet, we have our ammo finder for a heavy weapon that you'll use. Then in the arms we're running bolstering detonation so that we get class ability energy when causing damage with our grenade, and then we'll have our champion mod with that. Then in the chest we have our damage resist mods. Legs we have our scavenger mod for our heavy weapon, and then lastly in the class we're using utility kickstart to get extra class ability energy after using it. One of my favourite mods in the game, and then a distribution for more energy. In the artifact, depending on the season that you're playing, you will want to run any mod that benefits the build, whether that's weakening adds with void abilities or getting abilities faster. Anything that really works well with the void subclass, even if that's an overload void grenade or whatever. So just adjust the build to whatever seasonal mods you have available at the time. The very last thing you want to do with the build is make sure you have your resilience stat to 100 for the 40% damage reduction. Then if you can, max out mobility next to 100, and then strength and intellect. That is if you can achieve the quad 100 setup. So overall I do like this build a lot, and it's very similar to my previous Hunter Void build I made at the start of the season, but this is a perfect choice for those players to use where you want extra damage in PvE while still benefiting from infinite invis. Now you can just throw on a Sixth Coyote or Frostees with 100 mobility and strength and never have to worry about having no invis charge, but with this build set up the way it is, you can pretty much achieve the same thing except you get extra damage on top. So it's definitely worth using in endgame PvE, but I'd be careful when using it around other players, especially if you're trying to finish adds while invisible, because they might screw you over. But just remember that using the exotics 35% damage buff, you won't benefit extra from a well or bubble as they don't stack. But you can use your tether or things like a divinity if you're playing in a raid to have that debuff of 30%. While then getting the 35% from your exotic and the 25% from your elemental wells. The only downside to this build is that you're limited with time, but assuming you have both invis charges up, that's 12 seconds of extra damage, which could mean a lot when it comes to doing dungeons and raids. But overall, a really good build worth using in my opinion. Now guys, that is all for this new Hunter Void build in Destiny 2 Witch Queen Season of Plunder. or Season 18. Next, as always, be sure to check out the full playlist down below for more new and updated builds this season for Season 18, as I do create them every week here on the channel. But for now guys, keep grinding, keep building those crazy builds, and I'll catch you guys very soon for the next build video. Peace out guys.